We're now 6 days away from a painful and unnecessary government shutdown, thanks exclusively to the chaos and incompetence of House Republicans. And they don't seem at all incentivized to get their act together because, as one of them notes, they're still going to get paid no matter what happens, even if the government shuts down and members of the military and TSA and air traffic controllers don't get paid. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so again, we are barreling towards an unnecessary government shutdown thanks to the infighting between moderate Main Street Republicans, which is what they call themselves, and MAGA Republicans, primarily in the Freedom Caucus. And then you have the weak and ineffective and spineless Kevin McCarthy presiding over all of it. You have Donald Trump from the outside trying to meddle, trying to urge his far-right MAGA cultists into shutting down the government unless they can somehow defund the Department of Justice. It's just a mess, okay? This will be one of many Republican shutdowns inflicted on us by the GOP over the past 40 years. This is a predominantly GOP issue, and they inflicted their stupidity and their malice and their indifference and their brinkmanship on the rest of us, okay? This is just one such example. Now, I want to play this clip with Ralph Norman, a Republican congressman, a member of the Freedom Caucus, a far-right loon, and his surprising candor, right? He's surprisingly candid, and his indifference may shock you. So let's play this clip and we will unpack it together.
Country is we're at a tipping point, and we either handle it or we don't. And
but government employees won't be getting paychecks. Members of the military won't be getting paychecks. Members of the Border Patrol down on the border won't be getting paychecks. You're comfortable with that?
That's not right. They're going to get paid back pay whenever we open back up, and we will open back up. Look, Jim, the sun's going to still shine. The oceans.
But that's real pain that they're going to be going through. I mean,
in and out.
Are you going to get paid?
Yes, Congress gets paid. I didn't write the Constitution. I'm not that old. But what I'll tell you this is, there are a lot of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. And simply, you can agree or disagree with it, but
a lot of members of the military are living paycheck to paycheck. If they're not getting paid, you say they're going to get back pay. If they're living paycheck to paycheck, that doesn't sound too good for members of the military.
So the sociopathic indifference with which people like Ralph Norman respond to these things, it's overwhelming, but it's really part and parcel of what the Republican Party is. As you'll probably see on social media, there's this phrase, the cruelty is the point, and it very much is, right? The GOP has no interest and no talent for being a responsible governing party. They're good, again, at BS culture war stuff and pointing fingers, but not providing material solutions for their own constituents, let alone the American people as a whole. So this is what they're good for. And just, again, the sun's going to shine. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. Listen, they're going to get back pay. Sure, their bills are not going to be back billed. They're going to get those bills in real time. And sure, they may not be able to pay those bills, but they're going to get back pay eventually, probably. And I'm going to get paid. I'm going to get current pay, not back pay, current pay, because I get paid no matter what. You can see they have no incentive, right, to get their act together. He's going to collect a paycheck no matter what in real time, uninterrupted. Now, in response to this, a Democratic congresswoman is trolling the GOP by proposing the McCarthy Act, and it's an acronym, and it's hilarious. She says, let's see, Democratic Representative Angie Craig is taking aim at Speaker Kevin McCarthy in the looming Republican-prompted government shutdown with an excellently named bill. She introduced the My Constituents Cannot Afford Rebellious Tantrums, Handle Your Shutdown Act, or the McCarthy Shutdown Act Wednesday afternoon. The bill, if passed, which it will not, would temporarily block the paychecks of Congress members during a government shutdown. Currently, shutdowns don't affect them, even though it affects federal workers. It's ridiculous that we still get paid while folks like TSA workers are asked to work without a paycheck, or the military, or Capitol Security, or air traffic controllers, or FDA inspectors, etc. and so forth. Now, again, it's unlikely to even make it to the floor, and it certainly won't pass. But that's a great gesture on the part of the Democratic caucus, pointing it out. Like, hey, you should probably have skin in the game if you're going to, head us towards an unnecessary government shutdown. Now, as we've discussed, a government shutdown would not be nearly as economically catastrophic for the country as a whole as like the debt ceiling crisis, which Republicans nearly led us into a few months ago. But it would still be painful, not only for federal workers, including the military. And remember, the Republican Party claims to be the pro-military party. They love the troops, when of course in reality, they just love wars and, killing foreigners. They don't really care about the troops in particular, certainly not their health care, certainly not their pay, things like that. But it would also have potential implications for the rest of the country, okay? So it breaks it down. So travel would be affected. It could cause enormous delays in flight. Massive disruptions to air travel as tens of thousands of air traffic controllers and TSA personnel work without pay. Hundreds of TSA officers called out from work in 2019, and who can blame them because they weren't getting paid because there was a government shutdown in 2019. Some passport facilities could close in the event of a shutdown. There could be massive economic implications. The Bureau of Labor Statistics say it will stop releasing data, including key figures on inflation and unemployment. Lack of crucial data could make it difficult for investors in the Federal Reserve to interpret the U.S. economy. The Small Business Administration would not provide new loans to any businesses. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission would cease the vast bulk of its operations. Public health and safety, particularly the FDA. The Food and Drug Administration could be forced to delay food safety inspections for a wide variety of products across the country. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, will be forced to limit workplace inspections. Environmental Protection Agency would roll back most of its inspection activity at hazardous waste sites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is, again, completely unnecessary, but it's being inflicted upon us by the Republican Party. Now, I mentioned this before in a previous video. The idea, at least initially, was Kevin McCarthy, because this actually ties into, believe it or not, the impeachment inquiry into President Biden. So MAGA Republicans had a list of demands, massive spending cuts, which violated a deal, by the way, that Kevin McCarthy made with President Biden a few months ago. So he would be breaking his word as a liar and a hypocrite, which we probably shouldn't be surprised. That's what Republicans do. But the idea was, Kevin McCarthy, the people were speculating, okay, I'll give them an impeachment inquiry into President Biden, which is what they want, or at least a step in towards what they want. And maybe that will incentivize them to keep the government funding. Like maybe they don't get their budget cuts that these crazy people want, but I'll give them the impeachment inquiry, and maybe that'll motivate them to keep the government running, because if the government shuts down, there's no impeachment inquiry. And as I've said before, that doesn't quite work, because Kevin McCarthy, as the leader of the House of Representatives, he gets to decide what congressional functions are deemed essential and would continue to operate even in the effect of a government shutdown, which means MAGA Republicans could say, well, hey, Kevin, no big deal. Because if the government shuts down, you could just deem the Biden impeachment inquiry an essential function. So even if the government shuts down, we can continue to look at Hunter and Joe Biden. And that idea is also gaining popularity among the crazy Republicans in the Senate, not in the House of Representatives, the Senate. And I'm going to refer you to this exchange with Mike Lee and Maria Bartiromo.
We see a government shutdown. Does the investigation of President Biden stop? We've learned so much about what he and his family have been doing in the last decade.
Yeah, look, and those allegations are very troubling, and they need to be investigated. And I applaud Speaker McCarthy for launching this inquiry. Now, I am aware of no reason, Maria, why that inquiry could not continue, even if the government were to shut down temporarily.
So according to Mike Lee, who, by the way, he might sound reasonable, but he's as crazy as any of them. I have no respect for him. He was one of the major figures pushing for Donald Trump to try to steal the election from President Biden, and was pushing Mike Pence to basically throw out ballots he didn't like. Mike Lee is awful. He's one of the worst. But he's saying, yeah, if there's a government shutdown, we can still look into Biden. The House can still look into Biden. So it's just insane. Folks, they are setting up a situation in which they shut down the government, not pay the military, not pay TSA, not pay air traffic controllers, not pay FDA inspectors or EPA inspectors, et cetera, and so forth. But they still want to investigate Joe Biden. That goes to show that is such a beautiful snapshot into the irresponsibility of the Republican Party. But the last clip I want to play is from Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, and he makes a really interesting point when it comes to the implications of the shutdown, and in particular how it could affect his department, transportation, air traffic, things like that. But just note what he points out.
And I would add The shutdown is being used by some House Republicans as leverage to get budget cuts over and above the deal that was made, which would also have an incredibly negative effect on
They didn't like the deal in the first place.
Yeah, but think about what this means for transportation again. Obviously, I'm speaking mostly to what's in my lane, but some of the very same House Republicans who were lining up to try to make a partisan political issue of air travel disruptions are proposing cuts that would make it harder to modernize our systems. Some of the very same House Republicans who are lining up to try to make the pain of the people of East Palestine, Ohio into a partisan political issue would cut railroad safety inspections. It makes no sense.
Well said, Secretary Buttigieg. The only thing with which I would disagree is it does make sense. If you're a bad faith, disloyal opposition party, an authoritarian cult of personality that has no interest in or no talent for responsibly governing, and all you want to do is set up a bunch of no-win scenarios for the opposition, heads I win, tails you lose, that sort of thing, then it does make sense. And that's exactly what the Republican Party is doing. And again, it goes back to one of the recurring theses of this channel. You can have your legitimate criticisms of the progressive left and the Democratic Party as political proxies. They're there to be made. But if you're a sane person, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, the GOP should not be an option for you. Like, they're not a responsible governing party. I would argue in many respects they're not even conservative in the way that we would define it, okay? They are, again, a corrupt authoritarian cult of personality. So as we head into the 2024 election cycle, I want you to keep this in mind. And if you know people, if you're watching and you don't feel this way, you know that the Democratic Party is superior, you know that the progressive left has more answers than the progressive right, but you know people who aren't sure, or they're on the fence, or maybe even right-leaning, point this stuff out. Be like, again, how are you going to vote? Are you going to vote for a party that doesn't even try to govern and actually not only doesn't try to solve issues for you, but in many ways actively makes those issues worse out of spite? Or even if you don't like Democrats, even if you think they're too woke or whatever it may be, will you vote for the one other option that, for all its faults, at least tries to do something positive for the vast majority of Americans? No matter how you slice it, as far as I'm concerned, this shutdown is a great example of where there's no rational defense for voting Republican.